All right, so I think we'll get started, and a couple people are probably trickling in, but we have a few housekeeping items to share at the beginning anyway. So again, hello and welcome. We're so glad to have you today for our webinar, Tips and Tricks for Making the Most of the National Housing Preservation Database. Before we get started, just wanted to share a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be recorded, and we'll be sharing the link as well as the slides with everyone that registered following the webinar. You can also find a link to the recording of the webinar on our website once it has concluded. If you have a question, please feel free to share it in the chat at any time. We'll try to answer questions as they come in, but we'll have some time at the end for anything that we have missed. So I'm Kelly McElwain, and I'm the Manager of Research and Industry Intelligence for the Public and Affordable Housing Research Corporation, also known as PAHRC, and we're a member of the HAI Group family of companies. And PAHRC is a nonprofit that provides research and data to build evidence-based case for why affordable housing matters. And one of the things that our team does is partner with the National Low-Income Housing Coalition to produce the National Housing Preservation Database. And today I'm joined by Raquel Harati, the research analyst at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, as well as Cate Asp, a research analyst with our team at PAHRC. And we're a part of the team that maintains the NHPD, and we're excited to share some tips and tricks that we've learned along the way to help you make the most of the data. Today's webinar is going to begin with an overview of the key resources available through the NHPD to help you understand the affordable housing stock in your area. We'll then highlight the updates that we've made to the tool to make it even easier to use, like our new mapping feature, FAQ page, preservation dashboard, and revamped user guide. And then we'll share some of the tips and tricks for the most common uses to help you make the most of this important resource. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Raquel to frame today's discussion on what we even mean by federally assisted housing, which makes up the NHPD.
Thank you, Kelly. So we realize that not everyone may be super familiar with affordable housing preservation, so we just want to start off with quick background to level the playing field before diving into the NHPD itself. So to start, what is federally assisted rental housing? It is a rental property that receives a subsidy, a tax incentive, low-interest loans, or mortgage insurance in exchange for reducing the cost of housing for low-income individuals and families. It is also typically multifamily housing. Next slide, please. And so what is preservation in terms of federally affordable housing? Well, federally assisted rental homes require sustained or renewed funding commitments to ensure their future affordability and habitability through maintenance and lasting financial investments. So preservation is the act of investing in the existing affordable housing stock. It is essential as buildings age and existing rent and tenant eligibility requirements expire or come up for renewal. Next slide. And preservation efforts, however, aren't without their roadblocks. So the federally assisted housing stock typically encounters three key types of preservation risk that threaten their long-term affordability and quality. Those risks are exit risk, depreciation risk, and appropriations risk. And these risks can be interconnected and can show up differently across different federal subsidy programs. Federal housing subsidies typically include program requirements that pertain to tenant eligibility and the affordability of the rents. Exit risk results from those affordability and eligibility requirements that expire or program policies that enable property owners to exit these restrictions early. Depreciation risk is the likelihood that the financial stability and the physical condition of federally assisted housing will deteriorate over time. It becomes physically outdated or even can fall into disrepair, which poses a threat to habitability of the buildings for tenants. And lastly, the need for ongoing subsidies means that the existing federally assisted housing stock is largely dependent on funding from Congress. The funding appropriated by Congress must not only be maintained, but needs to increase annually to keep pace with inflation and rising costs. Appropriation risk refers to the risk that Congress will not provide adequate funding to preserve the existing federally assisted housing stock. Next slide. And so with that context in mind, I'll shift now to talking about the National Housing Preservation Database. So NLIHC and PAHRC launched the NHPD in 2012 to help housing lawyers, researchers, and housing advocates solve the difficulty that existed when trying to identify federally subsidized properties whose affordability restrictions were expiring and at risk of being lost from the existing housing stock. The NHPD is the only national deduplicated database of federally subsidized rental properties. The data in the NHPD comes from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Department of Treasury, and as well as some state-level data for a few states that have opted in to share. Currently in the NHPD, we have information for 80,000 active properties with affordability restrictions currently in place and 33,000 former properties whose affordability restrictions have expired, lapsed for various reasons. It has been used by over 16,000 people since it was started, and it is free to access for most users. Next slide, please. So what can you actually do with the NHPD? Generally, there's quite a bit that can be done with the data. You can use it to quantify the supply of affordable rental housing across the country or even down to your local area or state. You can identify properties at risk of expiring soon to inform your organization's preservation strategies and advocacy work. It can be used to identify affordable housing options for those who have a housing choice voucher to use, and to identify which affordable housing regulations are applicable to a specific building that may be of interest to you. Next slide. And so here are some real-world examples of past ways the NHPD has been utilized and the impact it's had from being used. For justification for housing advocates and government officials to appropriate $100 million to build and preserve affordable homes in Utah and Missouri, it has been used by legal aid organizations to litigate on behalf of tenant rights and to keep tenants stably housed. It was used by low-income families during the pandemic to search for housing and to assess their eligibility for the CARES Act eviction moratorium. Additionally, to competitively rank federal grants that expand transit access near affordable homes, and to support preservation policies and housing needs assessments in numerous cities, counties, and states. Next slide. And now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and review which federal programs are actually included in the database. Currently, we have data from 15 different programs in the NHPD. They are Section 8 project-based rental assistance, Section 811, Section 202 and 202 direct loans, the low-income housing tax credit, home, public housing, HUD-insured mortgages, USDA Section 538, 515, and 514, project-based vouchers, mod rehab, and state-funded programs for Connecticut, Delaware, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Florida, Oregon, Hawaii, Kentucky, Vermont, and Washington. And since its launch, the NHPD has evolved to include new data and features that better equip housing researchers, tenants, and activists. And most recently, this has meant the inclusion of new data on 600 properties that were funded through the National Housing Trust Fund, and that was just added in February. And some programs are excluded from the database, and those are most state and locally funded programs, the McKinney-Vento Permanent Housing Program, Housing Opportunity for Persons with AIDS, tax-exempt multifamily housing bonds, Section 516 farm labor housing, CDBG, and the Indian Housing Block Grant. Next slide, please. And so for the programs that we do have data on, what kind of data can you find in the NHPD about them? Well, you will find both property level and subsidy level information, like the name of the property address, and other geographic characteristics, the total number of units, the status of the subsidy, so is it active or inactive, the start and end dates for a subsidy, so is exit risk increasing as we get closer to that date, and at the subsidy level, you will find subsidy ID, subsidy name, owner or manager name and type, the start date and expiration date, and the rent to FMR ratio, among other things. Depending on how robust the data was that we received from the government agency, it will influence how much data is available for each property in the database. Next slide. And we update the NHPD 4 times a year. 2 of those times are full data refreshes in January and August, and a partial refresh for mainly Section 8 properties occurs in April and October. So we just had a full refresh done in August, and the data is cleaned and duplicate information is removed using an automated process to manually check, is also done by our team. Next slide. And as I previously mentioned, PAHRC and NLIHC are committed to continually enhancing the NHPD through new data additions and new tools to help stakeholders and researchers advocate for more affordable housing preservation. And with that being said, I just want to cover a few of our most recent updates and resources. We now have new data coverage for some of the U.S. territories, including Puerto Rico, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So properties are included in the NHPD now from those geographies. On our website, you will find an updated and improved user guide that has new use cases included, where you can find step-by-step instructions on the different ways to utilize the NHPD. We have a new FAQ page with the top questions that we are asked and the answers to those questions. And I just want to highlight the preservation dashboard, which was launched less than a year ago. And this is a great advocacy and research tool that gives preservation data and graphs at the state, county, and congressional district level. And next slide. Thank you. And I know I just covered a lot of information, so we will be including links in this PowerPoint, and Cate just dropped some in to the chat as well that provide further detail and instructions on the NHPD. We have a data dictionary that gives in detail explanations for each field and data type. We have notes on our methodology for the database and the general process that the NHPD operates under, video tutorials, and more that can be found on our website that will walk you through how to use the NHPD. And with that, I will now pass it over to Cate to discuss in more detail all the different tools and resources that the NHPD has.
Thank you, Raquel. I appreciate it. So as you all can see from everything Raquel shared, the NHPD has a broad range of information, and along with that comes many, many use cases. So your use case is very likely to inform how you interact with the NHPD, which is one of the main reasons we wanted to host this webinar today. So next slide, please. So you've heard a little bit about the data that's in the NHPD, the programs that we show in the NHPD, and other valuable information that Raquel shared, but that doesn't really show how the NHPD is accessed and what it looks like in practice. So just to give a bit of a glimpse into the database itself, at its core, the database is accessible in two main ways. On the left here, you can see the filtered grid, and on the right, you see the complete database. So the filtered grid is what you see when you first log in to the database. So if you've ever logged in before, is what pops up immediately. And the filter grid is ideal for users that want to do maybe like a one-off property search or need a list of affordable rental housing in their area, but don't need necessarily detailed subsidy characteristics for all these properties. It is extremely easy to filter by property name, your area of interest, and other characteristics such as when a property is set to expire. So if you wanted to find properties expiring in the next 5 years, using the filter grid would be very useful for that use case. And you're able to export this data as well. You can either export property records, subsidy records, or both at the same time. If you do that, there is a limitation to 1,000 records per file, just so you know. And then any filters you apply to the data exported from the grid will be applied to the data itself. So on the other hand, beyond the filtered grid, there is the complete database, and the complete database is ideal for researchers or users that need more detailed information about property and subsidy characteristics. You can access the complete database by downloading a prepackaged data extract of your choosing. This is located on the left side of the login page. You can actually see it in little writing on the filtered grid. It's underneath the subsidy characteristics filter. And if you click that drop down, you would see many different options for you to download. If you're curious about all the reasons you might download one option over another, you can go to our FAQ page. We do have a kind of a guideline showing which extract might be best for your needs. You're also welcome to download all of them and play around. We very much welcome that, and any specific questions we'd also be happy to answer. And the prepackaged data extracts are really powerful for researchers who wish to conduct in-depth analysis or even connect the NHPD to other data sources, which allows you to answer really unique research questions and more. Next slide, please. So beyond the database itself, PAHRC and the National Low-Income Housing Coalition also collaborate on joint research, and our research ranges on topics from natural hazards and federally assisted housing to the Picture of Preservation report, which catalogs information about the affordable housing stock. And just as a bit of an overview and example, in 2023, we released the Natural Hazards and Federally Assisted Housing Report, and this report investigates the impact natural hazards have on assisted rental homes across the country. And then beyond disaster, the Balancing Priorities report explores the challenges of preserving low-income housing tax credit units. Last year, we published an update to one of our flagship reports, which is the Picture Preservation Report. And this looks at the state of our federally assisted housing stock and documents the preservation risks that it's currently facing. And that's a little bit about what Raquel shared earlier as well. And then we've also looked into the need for better data on low-income housing tax credit properties as their affordability restrictions begin to expire. And that is in the Improving Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Data for Preservation report. So these are just a few studies that we have published. If you're interested in learning more, you can find these reports under the Reports tab on our website, which I sent in the chat earlier. Next slide, please. We are big data nerds over here, so we can't just stick to the database and research. We have to do more. So we've created some visualization tools for you all as well. And one of these tools is the Preservation Risk Dashboard. And this dashboard is an interactive tool that visualizes data-driven insights on the preservation risks that our affordable housing stock faces across the country. Our goal with the dashboard was to make an accessible tool that can be filtered on state, county, and congressional district to allow advocates, stakeholders, and policymakers to easily gain insight into the status of affordable housing in their communities. So rather than having to access the database, if you're looking for some high-level insights, the preservation dashboard is a really great tool for you. And for your selected level of geography and location, the dashboard showcases things such as the amount of federally assisted homes set to expire in the next 5 years in your area, the number of those that were recently preserved, the average age of federally assisted homes in your area, those set to expire in the next 5 years, and those set to expire in 5-year increments over time, as you can see on the yellow chart that's highlighted on the dashboard itself. And we also show exit risk characteristics for federally assisted homes that are set to expire in the next 5 years, which can include their age, their owner type, and other information. And then we finally have a breakdown of which programs assist the homes set to expire in the next 5 years in your area. And the dashboard is located at the preservationdatabase.org and is under the Reports tab and is the second one down. And like Kelly mentioned earlier during our housekeeping, all of these slides will be shared with everyone, so you can access it directly using the link on this slide, or you can scroll up and find it in our chat earlier. Next slide, please. If you're interested in this information but want something that dives just a little bit deeper, our preservation toolkits are a really great resource for that use case. And they provide really rich information and can help you do things such as assess your local affordability stock. And that looks like how many units you have in your area, how many are expiring in the next 5 years by year, and the risk these properties face, as well as preservation trends and more. So very similar to the dashboard in that sense, but a bit more detailed and in writing. It can also help you recruit partners to support affordable housing by having a tool that comprehensively highlights your affordable housing stock and the risk it faces. You can help partners better understand the needs in your area. It can also help encourage property owners with expiring rent restrictions to retain affordability commitments. Again, it showcases the importance of affordable housing and the work it's doing in your area. And it can also help invest in preserving high quality affordable housing by understanding where funds need to go. So depending on what the stock looks like in your area, there might be certain properties or buildings prioritized over others, and this could help you do that. And then finally, we hope these toolkits can help adopt policies that promote long-term affordability. So these are a great resource to bring to your senators and state partners to show community needs. Next slide, please. Finally, we do have a limit to what we do. We have the mapping tool. We recently updated the mapping tool, so I'm actually going to go ahead and give you guys a brief presentation. But before I dive into that, I'll just say this is a great resource to help you visualize not only the federally assisted housing stock in your area, but what funding stream each property is assisted by. Let me just go ahead here, share my screen. Okay, give it a second to load. Okay, you guys should all be able to see my screen now. So this is what you see when you first access the preservationdatabase.org website. All of the things mentioned earlier are here, the documentation Raquel pointed out, the reports I just talked about, some additional resources, and login page. I am going to go to the mapping tool. You can click this in two ways down here, either on the icon or the See More section. Go ahead and click on the icon. And then this is what you see when you first access the mapping tool. Immediately, we have some instructions here on how to use this. If you X out and want to learn more about those, you can go to the About section right here. It has the same exact information. But when you first open the mapping tool, this is what you see on the main page. We have a filtering widget over here on the left, and we have a legend over here on the right. So just some brief overview, I'm looking at the entire country, including US territories, and I can see there's quite a few properties that are assisted by LIHTC, quite a few assisted by multiple subsidies, other HUD programs, public housing, Section 8, and USDA. If I just want to, play around and I'm curious, I can click on any of these dots here, close the legend, and we have some very interesting characteristics for whatever property you just clicked on. In this case, it was C&M Apartments. And I can see down here, it is assisted by project-based Section 8. Go ahead and close that. You can bring the legend back up. And let's say I'm in Connecticut. I'm interested in understanding more about the housing stock in my area. For those that don't know, this is where PAHRC is based, so I do find it interesting to know what Connecticut is looking like in terms of the affordable housing stock. And I see there's quite a few properties in Connecticut that are assisted by other HUD subsidies. Connecticut is one of the states that we have state subsidy information for. So I bet if I click on some of these, I wouldn't be shocked to see that state subsidies were a common funding stream. And that is the case for this property I just clicked on here for the Pompey Hollow Senior Housing. So again, really easy to access detailed information about these properties. And then if I want some overview of some summary statistics for the area I've panned to or the area I've filtered to, clicking the star up here pops up the summary statistic information. And if I were to change the filter, I could click update results and it would populate again. And this shows how many properties are in the area I've filtered to, the average total units per property, and some other key statistics. So in Connecticut, I can see we have 1,268 properties logged in the National Housing Preservation Database. Go ahead and close that again. And I'll filter down a little bit farther to showcase another use case of the mapping tool. I'm gonna go to New Haven, one of the largest cities in Connecticut. And I can see now I have a filtered view of New Haven. Again, now I have more information right here about the summary statistics as well. And one of the impacts of the preservation database that Raquel mentioned was the ability to federally rank transit grants. So this is a really great tool for being able to do that. If I go ahead and click on the nearby tool over here, and let's say I'm trying to get a grant for transit, and I need to know how many affordable housing properties are in my area. Let's say I want to put in something near Yale University. I can go ahead and click the point dot, drop it right where I want it, and then set a range. So if my range is 1 mile, which maybe would kick me up higher in the competitiveness for transit grants, I can see how many affordable housing properties are in a 1 mile radius at this point. In this case, it's 38. If it was actually a 5 mile radius, I could increase that and just click in this pane here. I'll go ahead and update. Because I filtered down, it's only going to showcase properties that are in New Haven. So if you want to see properties outside of an area you've filtered, you'd have to turn the filter off or filter to a larger extent. And then beyond the point tool, you can also draw a polygon as well and click enter. And now I have a custom shape, which is filtering for properties in a certain radius. So that is the nearby tool. If you have any questions about this tool, we're always happy to answer any user questions, but there's also an FAQ widget over here, which might answer some of your common questions. You can also toggle on a county layer if you're interested in seeing county lines on the map. And if you're interested in sharing this tool with colleagues, you can go ahead and click the share button right here. With that, I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to pass it back to Kelly to share some more tips and tricks about using the NHPD.
Thanks, Cate. So jumping back into things, now that you all have an understanding of the tools available through the NHPD, we wanted to help you make the most. So when using the NHPD, it's important to have an understanding of the status of the property. Properties in the NHPD can be classified as active, inconclusive, or inactive, depending on whether the owner of the property is subject to these affordability restrictions. Properties that are active are currently required to remain affordable to low-income families, whereas inconclusive properties, we're missing some key information to make a determination one way or the other. If you want to be conservative, you can assume those are currently affordable. And then we also have inactive properties, which are properties that were at once assisted by programs and were subject to affordability restrictions, but those restrictions have lapsed either due to expiration or owner opt-out. So depending on your specific application will dictate whether or not you want to filter these properties in or out. So a common way that people use the NHPD is to, specifically for legal aid organizations, advocates, and developers, is to use the NHPD to identify a specific property. This has helped social workers and legal aid providers understand which protections apply to a particular property, and also identify upcoming affordability restriction expirations to inform preservation planning. So when looking for a specific property, we always recommend to search for as many fields as possible, whether that is the property name, address, or street name. And this will help you maximize the likelihood that you will locate that specific property. And when doing that, we always recommend searching for keywords. So if the property name is something like the Pines, we recommend searching Pines. And this is because there can be some sensitivity in how property names and addresses are listed in the NHPD. You can also filter the tool down to your geography of interest. So whether it's a state, city, or zip code, and this really helps refine your results so that you're only looking for properties that are in your sample of inventory. And if you're searching for a property and you're having trouble finding it, don't worry. Sometimes the names and addresses that are entered can be a little different in the NHPD. And you can also cross-check with Google Maps to confirm nearby street names or alternative property identifiers. Sometimes the property name might be represented as an older name if the property has undergone redevelopment, or if it is a property that spans multiple blocks or is on a street intersection, it helps to search for both street names to identify it, because the NHPD only lists one address per property, so it's possible that the address in our data set doesn't reflect the address that you might be familiar with. And another thing to keep in mind is that the NHPD doesn't include every affordable rental property. Locating properties might be more difficult if it's newly built, and this is because sometimes it takes time for this data to appear in the NHPD, or if it does not receive federally funded project-based rental assistance, or if it has multiple building addresses that don't align with how addresses are reported. So another common application of the NHPD is to identify properties that are at risk of loss. For instance, Montgomery County, Maryland used the NHPD to identify properties that were nearing the end of their affordability restrictions, and then identified whether they were located in low poverty neighborhoods, were near rail transit, served low income populations, and were owned by for-profit organizations. And this helped them shape their long-term preservation planning. So if you're interested in doing that for your community, the database can be a really great place to start. And when we talk about at-risk properties, we really are referring to homes that are falling into disrepair or have affordability restrictions that are expiring in the coming years. So to begin, you can log into the database and filter properties that have a property status that is active or inconclusive. And then from there, you can select the latest end date to 5 years from today's date and filter it by whatever state, city, zip code, or geography of interest. And then from there, you can refine this list even further based on your local preservation priorities. And on the next slide, I'll share some examples of what that might include, whether it's the condition of the property, its risk of converting to market rate, or the populations that are served. So now I'm just going to do a screen share to show you how you can identify this in your area. So I pulled up the preservationdatabase.org, and you can log in here. And then if you just want to replicate exactly what I had shared, you can, I'm going to search for my state of interest. So again, we're based in Connecticut, so I'll go to Connecticut. And then I'm going to search for New Haven. And then here's going to show you all of the properties located in New Haven, Connecticut. And then you can refine this to show just the properties with active and inconclusive affordability restrictions. And then look at properties that have a latest end date that is in the coming year. So I'm going to change the pin bar right here to is less than, and then I'll put this out a couple years from today. And there you go. If you want to view more information about the affordability restrictions imposed by the particular property, you can click the arrow next to the property to drop down more information about its restrictions. And then you can also add in additional variables by clicking the Show Additional Variables box. And then if you want to add any of them in, you can drag and drop them here. And once you're satisfied, you can then export the data. So as Cate shared, there's two options to export data. There's the export filtered grid, and then there's the download complete database. We typically recommend people that are just doing a quick one-off search for properties to export to filtered grid, and then researchers to leverage the download complete database. And the difference between these two data sets are that the download complete database is going to list all the property and subsidy characteristics all on one row, so it has a lot more rich information, whereas the export filtered grid is just going to get you exactly what you need, the list of property addresses. Since that one's a little bit more straightforward, so again, you would just click it right here, and then you have the option to select whether you want to just export the property information or the subsidy characteristics. Since a property can be assisted by multiple subsidies, exporting subsidies will always result in a greater number of records. And I just want to take some time to walk through what the complete database looks like. So I'll download an example of it for DC. So as I mentioned, it's going to show you all of those property characteristics to the left. So you can see those here. You might need to expand the size of the columns to make them appear more, and you can see a lot of those same fields. And as you scroll along, once I get to around this column, you start to see some of those subsidy characteristics here. So each of these fields, the prefix corresponds to a program name. Later on, there's going to be a slide that I'll share that gives you a cheat sheet for understanding which of the prefixes correspond to which subsidy programs. And we display two subsidies for each subsidy type in the data. As you can see here, these fields are blank. That doesn't mean the data is missing. It just means that it doesn't apply here. So just if you're analyzing the data, that kind of helps make sense of all that you're seeing. We also have indicators for the number of active, inconclusive, and inactive subsidies for each subsidy type. And here's where you can see the start date for the first Section 8 contract associated with this property. We have a lot of other material that we want to get through today, so I'm going to pivot back to the PowerPoint, but if there's any interest in learning more about these files at the end, I'm happy to take some more time to walk through those. So as I mentioned, you may want to further refine this list to filter properties that meet a certain criteria. So ultimately, the community priorities will shape what at-risk looks like for your area. So this slide summarizes some possible indicators that you can consider including. So this includes metrics that examine the condition of the property, like the building age, physical inspection score, occupancy rate, and a history of capital investments. You could also look at the risk of converting to market rate by examining characteristics such as the owner type, whether the property has renewable subsidies, faces upcoming affordability restrictions, is in a high rent growth area, or has other property characteristics associated with opt-out. And then finally, you can also look at whether the property meets a local priority and would be really difficult to replace if lost. So this can include target tenant types. So maybe your community has a shortage of housing for people with disabilities, or has a shortage of deeply affordable homes. So you can look at the funding characteristics to understand who lives at these properties. And you can also look at whether it is located in a neighborhood where it might be particularly challenging to develop affordable housing, such as a low poverty area. So now that we've identified how to identify properties at risk of loss, we wanted to talk about how you can go a step further by creating a local preservation database. So this local preservation databases help communities monitor and protect affordable housing by combining the NHPD with local insight. And it provides a strong foundation and the NHPD really provides a strong foundation for federally assisted properties, but ideally folks on the ground will likely know more about the condition of these properties, other funding, and kind of where these properties stand. So that's where it really helps take the NHPD to the next level. On the slide, I've linked to some examples of local preservation databases, including Florida Housing Data Clearinghouse, California Housing Partnerships Mapping Tool, Afford Connecticut's housing database, and Montana's affordable housing database. And they're all kind of serve and have different fields included in them, but can be helpful if you're looking for a framework on how you might go about getting started. But some general tips on doing this, if you want to begin with the NHPD, are to begin by downloading the complete database from the NHPD. And then from there, you'll want to create a unique identifier for each property to track them across updates. Then you want to add columns for any of the additional characteristics that you want to track or funding sources that you want to incorporate. And then to match the data against your inventory, you want to then standardize fields so that they're consistent, whether it's the street names or apartment names, so that you can maximize your matches. You can then match your database match the NHPD against your data using fuzzy matching tools in Excel, VLOOKUP, or software like OpenRefine or Power Query to help you conduct these matches. You can then add in any local data that is not currently in the NHPD, remove duplicates, and then mark those for future reference. But if this sounds too complicated to you and you have a connection with a state agency that collects data, or if you have that data yourself, you can also send that data to us and we'd be happy to incorporate it in the NHPD. We shared some of the states where we currently track state-funded subsidies, and if your state was not listed there and you would like to have it incorporated, feel free to connect with any of us after the webinar and we'd be happy to help facilitate that process. So I shared earlier on the data set that there are a number of different prefixes included in the file, and here is where you can see those prefixes and which programs they correspond to. All of this is included in our FAQ page as well, so it'll be on the slides that will be sent to everyone, and you can also reference the FAQ page for more information. So the NHPD is really helpful for not only advocates and legal aid providers, but it's also helpful for researchers that are looking to understand the affordable housing inventory in their area or broadly across the country. And as Cate mentioned, we've conducted a bunch of research using the NHPD ourselves. And over time, we've gotten some questions on how to add fields that are not currently in the NHPD, but are common applications. So those include understanding how many assisted units are at the property level, having a numeric field for the REAC or Inspire score, or understanding when a tax credit property is reaching year 15. So to help folks better navigate and identify those fields, in our user guide, we included some Excel formulas that you can easily use to paste in to understand these insights. So we encourage you to check those out. It's really simple. All you have to do is add a field and copy and paste it. However, if you do that, please be aware that if you add additional fields to the data set, you will need to change the column names and numbers so that the formula doesn't get messed up as you add those additional fields in. So please be aware. And this is really valuable if you want to understand how many assisted units are at the property, or if you want to be able to more effectively sort and filter based on REAC scores. So for context, REAC scores and Inspire scores are based off of an inspection of the building. They're available for public housing and Section 8 project-based rental assistance properties. And the score can be anywhere from 0 to 100. Scores below 60 are considered failing and might indicate that the property may require investment. So it's a common way to a proxy to monitor the condition of the property that you might want to consider looking into. Now, for the researchers on the call, I just wanted to highlight some of the potential limitations of the NHPD. If you're interested in doing some more in-depth analyses, please be aware that there are some challenges if you're looking to do overtime data specifically. So these are all summarized here. So some challenges to be aware of are that some data might not be available. So as Raquel mentioned, we do not generally have data on state-funded subsidies. We also have limited data on state-imposed tax credit affordability restrictions, and historic data for some programs are limited. There's also there's also data lags, as I mentioned before, when we're talking about searching for specific properties, and they can be inconsistent across programs. Lags for tax credit properties tend to be the longest, and there's also overtime research limitations. And this is really due to differing changes in how we process the data over time, and as well as changes in data quality over time. Our data notes page summarizes all of the changes that occur from refresh to refresh if you're looking to cross-check and replicate analyses from the NHPD over time. If you're interested in that, that goes beyond the scope of today's webinar, and I encourage you to reach out to us with any questions, and we'd be happy to talk through those in more detail. And similarly, about a year or two ago, we had a webinar dedicated to using the NHPD to support research where we go in more depth on these topics, and I encourage you to check that out if you're a researcher on the call. And the last thing to be aware of is that data quality varies by program, and if we are missing key data on certain fields, they may be hidden. So if we're missing the street name, for instance, it will be suppressed from the NHPD. So please be aware of that. And ultimately, if your area has local data that may be more comprehensive, as I've shared earlier, this may be particularly true for the condition of the property, the history of its recent investments, as well as the end dates for tax credit affordability restrictions. That is a current limitation of the NHPD, which I'd be happy to go on in more detail. But we highlight that in one of our reports that Cate had shared on improving data for LIHC preservation. So with that kind of summarizes some quick tips to make the most of the NHPD. And we wanted to reserve the rest of the session for questions that you may have. So I know we've been answering a couple questions as they've come into the chat, but are there any others that we can help answer? Or if I would also like to make a plug for if you've used the NHPD regularly in the past and would like to share your experience on how you've been able to use it or ideas that you have for how we can make this data even better, we encourage you to fill out our user survey and share that experience. It's always helpful for us to understand how our data is making an impact to tell those stories and also help others that want to do similar take similar steps. And then also if there's things that we can do to make your experience better. So we'll put a link. I see Cate put a link in the chat. So we appreciate any feedback you provide, positive, negative, constructive. We welcome it all. Let's see, are there any questions? Thanks. So it looks like there's a question about the links to the video tutorials work. So we'll look into that, and when we send out the link to the recording, we'll make sure to include the updated links there. All right, so it looks like we have our first question. What happens to properties when their affordability restrictions expire? That is a great question, and the answer is it depends. So not all properties with expiring affordability restrictions will ultimately lose their affordability. Some of these properties, particularly those that have renewable assistance, will oftentimes renew their contracts. This is particularly true for Section 8 project-based rental assistance contracts. Others that don't have renewable assistance may then seek additional funding to continue to operate the property affordably. Some may transition to a more moderately affordable income mix, or others might be repositioned to market rate housing. This is really an understudied area of research. So if there's any folks on the call that are looking for a topic to examine, I think this would be a really interesting one to explore, something that we're also looking at as well. And we look forward to sharing our work in that area to better understand that question. I also want to make a plug for our picture preservation report, where we talk about some of the past research that has been done in this area if you're looking for what others have done. So another question is on, or more comment is on mixed finance properties, on how they can be confusing. So one client lives in a property that's listed as project-based Section 8, but not every unit is covered, and that is a common occurrence in the NHPD. You can use the NHPD to potentially identify mixed income properties by looking at discrepancies in the total units of the property and the number of assisted units at the property. So you might see a property that has 50 units, but only 20 of them are assisted, and that will be your clue that it's mixed income. What's challenging is that we don't necessarily know which units at the property are designated as affordable. That would ultimately be up to that property owner to clarify. That's a good observation. Another question, does your preservation dashboard sort by city? I only see a county button. Cate, do you want to take that one?
Yes, so at this time, the preservation risk dashboard can only be sorted by state, county, or congressional district. We would love to potentially explore adding city in the future, but due to processing power limitations, this is what we can include at this time, but we love having the feedback to know it would be useful to you all eventually as a future update.
We do have a download that is separate, so it's connected to the dashboard that breaks down summaries of affordable housing by additional regions, but it's only it's an Excel file. I'm not sure if we currently include city. If we don't, that's something that we can incorporate going forward. I think a challenge with city is also ensuring that we're talking apples to apples with cities, because they're what someone might believe is in a city might go beyond what the census designates as its city. So we would just need to be sure that we're talking apples to apples before adding that. But that's a great recommendation for the future. And another plug, if there is data that you're looking for that you don't see, please let us know. Are there any other questions?
One more thing I want to throw in is our preservation toolkits are customizable by your location. We would take customer requests for those toolkits. Kelly, are we able to do cities for those requests?
For the toolkit?
Yeah.
Yes, so those you can, so that was a good point. The toolkits that Cate had mentioned, they can really be customized to any geography of interest using those predefined fields on the NHPD. We'll send a link to where you can locate those, and requesting them is really simple. We link to the largest metro areas in all of the states, but additional regions can be created by request, and it's super quick and easy to update those. Okay, so another question. Is it possible to see is it possible to see complete subsidy information for developments? For instance, a tax credit development also has project-based vouchers. Yes, so you can see all of the funding characteristics for a property by looking at the so as I showed here, you can click the arrow if you're using the filtered grid. So here's an example of a property that has 3 subsidies. And you can see this property is assisted by mod rehab, project-based vouchers, and home. A lot of these only have 1. You can also toggle this to view any inactive subsidies. So you can see this property had a tax credit that is no longer active. So this is another good point about how you can use the NHPD to not only see what programs currently assist a property, but its history of investments, which is helpful for understanding maybe when a property first became affordable. You can also identify the funding characteristics using the download that I had shared earlier. So here is an example where you can look at whether, if you want to see whether a property has a Section 8 contract and another form of assistance, you'd be able to apply multiple filters. So you'd be able to select has at least one tax credit and has at least one HUD insured mortgage, and filter those that way. So that way you can understand how all these programs work together to make affordable housing pencil out. That is a good question. Another question. Let's see. Dan had noted that we don't have and yes, and another good point is that the NHPD has latitude and longitude. So while we might not have geographic characteristics for every single possible boundary that you might need for your purposes, we'd be able to easily pull that for a jurisdiction as long as there's geographic information that we'd be able to match to. In our user guide, we included a section on using spatial software to match the NHPD to additional characteristics, whether it is natural hazard risk, rail access, or just geographic boundaries. So if you're a researcher that wants to get more into that, we encourage you to check that out. Are there any other questions? How far back does the subsidy information go? That is a great question. So as Raquel mentioned at the start, we started creating the NHPD back in 2012. So really, we have a good sense of the subsidies that have been awarded 2012 onward. However, for certain programs, we do have more historical information. So that includes low-income housing tax credits, HUD-insured mortgages, home assistance. We have a record of all of the assistance that's been provided since the inception of those programs, but it gets a little trickier for some of the other programs that we track, including Section 8 project-based rental assistance and Section 202 direct loans and public housing. As those programs, the data sets that we pull into the NHPD reflect a point in time estimate of all the properties assisted by those programs. So we don't necessarily know all of the public housing properties that were built before the NHPD's inception because the data inventory just wasn't necessarily there. So that is a limitation that would apply to researchers, and I'd be happy to connect with anyone with more information that wants to learn more about programs that over time data is more limited. Another question is, what has your team learned from using the NHPD? So I would say that our flagship report, the picture preservation report, really showcases a lot of those stats, as well as the preservation dashboard. Those are the kind of the crown jewels of what it has been most informative to glean from the NHPD. I would say first and foremost, understanding simply how many affordable rental properties there are across the country that's deduplicated is definitely definitely a really important question to answer, because previously, before the creation of the NHPD, we would have disparate lists of tax credit properties and public housing, but we didn't know for certain how all those added up because there is duplication across them. So we've learned that there are now 5 million federally assisted rental properties that are currently affordable through project-based subsidies. So that is one. And then I would say the second thing that is the most important that we've learned is the number of federally assisted homes that are reaching the end of their affordability restrictions. And this has been a really powerful tool for technical outreach for folks on the ground looking to preserve these properties, as well as advocacy and ensuring that the message is made that resources need to be available to not only build new affordable housing, but fund our existing affordable housing. I welcome Raquel or Cate to chime in with any other fun or interesting lessons or stats that they've learned from their work using the NHPD.
I can hop in, Cate. I wasn't a part of this project, but one of the research reports that Cate mentioned is when the NHPD was linked with FEMA data with the National Risk Index. And so from that, the team was able to learn how many federally assisted affordable homes were in high risk areas for climate disasters. And I think that's something that's really important given the increased frequency that's happening.
Thanks. That's a great point. And another plug, you can find all of the research that we've talked about that have used the NHPD on our website. We also have a page where we feature examples of the ways that the NHPD has been cited in other research or in the news if you want to get a sense of the advocacy potential that the data offers, as well as what other questions our peers have uncovered using this important data. Let's see, any other questions before we wrap up? All right, do you have any suggestions of other kinds of data that could be useful or interesting to join with the NHPD? So that is a great question. In our user guide, there is a page dedicated to talking about linking the NHPD to other data sources, and we provide resources to those. So measures that examine natural hazard risks. So whether a property is in a floodplain or in an area with higher wildfire risk, like the wildfire hazard potential data could be really interesting to understand locally where affordable properties could be at risk in your area to inform natural hazard and disaster preparedness planning, as many of the folks living in these properties could be the most vulnerable to the negative impacts of natural hazards. So that is one application that I think would be really important for emergency planning professionals. Another could be looking at the neighborhood characteristics, as that is helpful to know from a planning perspective, but also from a understanding from a preservation risk standpoint. So whether that's looking at the poverty rate of the neighborhood, or going even deeper to understand the access to rail or jobs in a particular area. There's a number of different census products that can help you uncover some of those questions. The Public and Affordable Housing Research Corporation actually just launched our Neighborhood Opportunity Search tool, which catalogs the opportunity capital for given areas based on their educational outlook, their labor market access, transit access, and health outlook. So I encourage you to check that out if you're interested in that line of questions. And then another could be understanding, like if you're doing an academic research or linking to policy information for a given area, or even just subsidy characteristics or parcel data, which can help you clue in the true and current owner of the property. The options are pretty limitless because you can link based off of address. So really anything that is spatial data is potentially fair game. Anyone else have any ideas of data that they think would be interesting that wasn't already covered? All right, so with that, I just want to thank everyone for joining us today and for an engaging chat. We'll be sending out a link to the recording slides and all of the links that we've shared during today's presentation for anyone that had to step aside or wasn't able to attend. And as a reminder, just if you have any feedback on how you've used the NHPD or things that you'd like us to do in the future, we encourage you to fill out the survey. But in the meantime, thank you all for joining.